Good morning and welcome to this week's Dynamic Dialogue. Today, August 4th, our topic is going to be risk and risk indicators. So we're going to talk about the risk in the supply chain and some of the indicators. As always, this is our weekly Dynamic Dialogue webinars. We do these every week for all sorts of people interested in supply chain, whether you were interested in supply chain before the pandemic, became interested as we're in the pandemic, or think you're going to need to know something after the pandemic. These are going to continue indefinitely, weekly, so I encourage you to subscribe today. You can use this as a forum for sharing thoughts, ideas, challenges. You can bring questions. I supply resources, and we always talk about lessons learned. We do a short presentation, then we open it up for questions, comments, and whatever. The link that you have today is good for all of August. So welcome to August. So we're going to talk about risk. Coronavirus or the COVID-19 or the pandemic, all of that dominates most of the discussions today around supply chain. But as we know, supply chains are really complex. And so the risk associated with supply chains or the risk inherent in supply chains is also very complex. It has a broad scope. It has a scale from very minute details to the whole of the supply chain. It has a rate of disruptions that affects it greatly. If you have very few disruptions, your supply chain operates much more smoothly. And the frequency that those disruptions appear, the significance, the impact of those disruptions, all have to do with the risk that's involved in supply chains. So there's a lot of containment strategies and a lot of things that companies do to try to protect their supply chains. And there's things that are going on now trying to contain the virus that are affecting the supply chains even more than before. Things like travel restrictions, things like reduced labor pools. Many companies have furloughed people. Many people are reluctant to come to work because of the virus. They don't want to be that. Working from home is a different labor pool than working in the office. So those labor pools have been impacted. With the quarantines and lockdowns affecting both customers and suppliers, we're seeing a lot of mismatch. There's a dichotomy between what's going on with the supplier, where that supplier is located, what state that local environment of that supplier is in compared with the customer. For example, if you have suppliers in Asia, they may be back up and running, but you may now just be feeling most of the impact of the virus. Or your company could have been working very well through the first March, April, May, and now been hit by that. Or you may be hit again by lockdowns. I'm here in Southern California in the Los Angeles area. We had things on restricted basis. We started to open up and we're back on restrictions now. So because the virus had spiked and peaked, well, it hasn't peaked yet, unfortunately. So it had spiked, and so we're back on some of the lockdown and quarantine recommendations previously implemented. We've seen a lot of material and supply shortages, a lot of things related to the medical industry, but also materials that aren't necessarily medical, but are affecting other types of material. I have a colleague who told me that they bought a lot of clear plastic for some windows in their products. And all of a sudden that was in short supply because that plastic was now being used to make face masks at a rate not previously seen before. So it's kind of hit and miss with what might be short today or tomorrow or whatever. So you have to stay on top of these things. Production rates, businesses shut down unless they were considered essential. Those that were essential kept only parts of their business running sometimes. They also, there's many businesses we've seen that have shifted their business from one product line to other product lines or to adjacent. And then we've seen things like Clorox, paper towels, paper products, really focus on those products, and the demand for those has exceeded everything that we expected. I saw an article in the last couple of days from one of the people at Clorox who said they thought they would be back up and stocked in this time frame, in the summer to late summer. Now he's saying it's going to be into 2021 before we see the level of product available that was prior to the pandemic in the January, February timeframe of this year. That's because people are hoarding, but it's also because more people are using those products to protect themselves, their family, their workplace, and the medical requirements for those has soared through the roof. So there's so many different things going on that production rates have been affected. And some production has been ceased altogether or suspended. The logistics have been impacted. We've seen we've seen lead times grow, not only because of all the other things related to production, but also because transportation has slowed. And then cash flows are stretched beyond any expectations for many suppliers and many customers. So there's a lot of after effects and a lot of also effects going on from the pandemic. So there's a few risk categories that I want to look at. And when you talk about risk, we look at the likelihood of that happening, the probability of it happening, and the impact or the consequences. So this is a chart that you often see companies use to assess risk. If you have a low likelihood and a low consequence, then it's in the green area. If you have a high consequence and a very high likelihood of that happening, that ends up being in the red area. So you plot your known risks or your projected risks in these kinds of graphs, and then you say, where am I? So the health in the pandemic up until about February of this year was not really in that red area. Now it's smack in the corner of that. The likelihood is 100%, and the consequences are still unknown. We still are dealing with a lot of fallout, and we're going to be dealing with that for some time. So we're not really sure what's going to happen with all of this. We have disasters that we've always dealt with. Sometimes these are at the supplier site, sometimes they're at the customer site, sometimes they're at a distribution center in between, but the site does matter. And we're looking at disasters that are both natural and unnatural. Natural disasters are earthquakes, hurricanes, and we all know about the hurricane that's happening now on the East Coast. So that's another natural disaster. Unnatural disasters are things like fires, explosions, things that are not caused by Mother Nature, but are caused by human interference. So some fires are natural, like from a lightning strike, others are not, they're arson, and then some are kind of in between, because you can have an issue that starts as very small, but because the conditions are ripe for the fire to spread, then you can have a huge fire. Here in Southern California, we're dealing with a couple of serious fires right now. One is called the Apple Fire. It's out in the Riverside County, and it's been growing. I have a friend who lives in Tucson. They had a fire earlier this year that was very close to their home, and they were on tenterhooks for a while, waiting to see whether they were going to have to evacuate, what was going to go on. Thankfully, that one is contained, but there's many others, and here in California, we deal with this for a large part of the year. Another category of risks is around labor practices and human rights. We have pretty strict laws here in the United States. We don't necessarily have those across the globe. So those labor practices and what's human rights are very much in the news today. And also discrimination, harassment, all of those things fall into this area. Part of this, the risk that we see today, it has to do with employee stability. So this is not every employee, but those key employees that every company needs to keep their business running smoothly. Now, there's the old adage about no one is irreplaceable, and that's true. But there are some key employees in every company that you highly desire to have stay in place and keep working with you, because they have a lot of knowledge, they have in particular experience, and they are the ones that can help get things done. So there's some key employees, and you want those employees to be stable, to be happy to be coming to work every day. There's financial stability in the risk categories, both financials for the supplier and financials of the customer. If your supplier has trouble financially, you might be able to help out with some early payments, reducing payment terms. You might be able to even loan them some money if you're from a very large company. If you're from a customer, though, your suppliers want and need to get paid and deserve to be paid. If you have some instability in your finances and you can't pay customer the customer can't pay their suppliers on time, then your suppliers are going to be unhappy with that. They're going to threaten or even stop or reduce the deliveries. That's going to have a more impact on your company. So that stability of both the supplier and the customer is very, very important. We know that we live in an area of time where we have a lot of regulatory legal requirements. Everything from Sarbanes-Oxley, conflict minerals, to our OSHA standards, to all of the contracts that we have in place with all of our customers and suppliers, and all of the legislature around how we treat employees, how we hire, the hiring practices, all of those things. So there's a lot of regulatory and legal things, and that doesn't even begin to touch on the production capabilities and all of the environmental requirements and all of that. So there are so many things that we have to do today to have our companies be viable. Those are important, and that's a very high risk area in some cases. And then information intellectual property security. More than ever, we have people who are working from home, people who are working in non-standard work environments. We have a lot of information that's being shared, that's being accessed. So it's very important that we protect our information and our intellectual property. And cybersecurity has been in the news, and it will be continuing in the news. So there are some indicators that we have to indicate what risk is coming, what risk might be the next one that we see. And there's a lot of factors to that. So whether it's weather vanes that tell us about which way the wind is blowing, reading the tea leaves, or tracking Storm Isaias off the coast of North Carolina, Virginia, on up into the northeast part of the United States, there's so many ways that we can look and see what's happening. So there are some other factors that contribute to business risk. Employee retention, that's a good measure of what's happening with a company. If they're able to keep employees, especially those key employees that we just talked about, that's a very good indicator. If they're not, then that one indicator tells you that there may be other things that are happening there and it may get worse. Compliance metrics, companies that are able to maintain their compliance through their certifications, through their practices and their processes, that those are good indicators. If they're not meeting those metrics, then that is an indicator that there's problems, and there's probably problems deeper than you're seeing just on the surface. So any one of these indicators that shows up may not be related, may not be a sole issue. It may be related to many other things, and there may be a web underneath that could be very fragile. Supply chain disruptions are another indicator. Supply chain disruptions from bankruptcy, from delays to product releases, from quality issues, from labor strikes, things that really don't necessarily always happen, but you can see these things coming, and when they do, they can have big impacts. Natural hazards, we just talked about these. We have a hurricane going on right now. Here in the United States, we have always the threat of earthquakes. There have been some earthquakes in the news here in Southern California in the last couple of weeks. Tornadoes, it's tornado season in the Midwest, and floods often come from any of those. They come from hurricanes, they come from tornadoes, they can even come from earthquakes when you have issues with water mains and pipes breaking and things like that. So the floods can be, and they can be just from extra rain that comes this time of year. So all of these things we have to be aware of. So I want to rewind just a bit and look at some top 10 issues. This is a lot of information I got from Risk Methods, a report that they send out. This is very good information. I thought it was very key, and so I incorporated quite a bit of it today. In 2019, the top 10 issues were ownership structure, which ownership structure is really things like mergers, acquisitions, sales, when you spin something off, when you move two companies together. So that was the top 10 issue last year. A lot of companies are doing that. You're seeing a lot of acquisitions, mergers, changes, spin-offs, all of those things. Number 2 was employee stability, which I've talked about. That says, understand that the financial issues come into here, and that makes employees stable or unstable. But it's very important that you have some employee stability. When you have business partners that have fines and penalties, that's an important thing there. You want to look at that and see what's going on. So Um, the business partner fines and penalties, these contribute to the organization's regulatory and legal risk, and they can have a big impact there. So it can be either side. And when I say business partner, I mean not at the customers. When I talk about location, then I mean at the location where the company resides. Field issues are tend often to be quality problems, but they can be problems other than quality, but they're problems with the supplier's product and or services, or things that you see in the field. It could be parts that are coming into your factory from the field, or it could be parts that are in the field that have issues such as warranty, recalls, things like that. The fifth top 10 issue was disaster at a location. So that is disaster at the company that's making the product. Earthquakes, we understand that can be anywhere because it can affect a lot of things. Flash floods, extratropical storms. So you see 3 natural hazards right there on number 6, 7, and 8. Power outages. They can come from a lot of things. They can come from fires, they can come from storms, floods, they can be a result of some of the things in 6, 7, and 8, or they can be other issues such as just the fact that it gets hot and so many people are using that and they have brownouts. And then here in California, because of the fire issues, we've all been told that they can reduce the power, turn off the grid or turn down the grids because of saving power and because of preventing fires and issues like we've had in previous years. And then finally, disasters at your partner site. If your partner has an issue, you have an issue. If they have a disaster, which by definition is a big deal, then you are probably going to be severely impacted from that as well. So those are the 2019 top 10. So they've recently done the same study and they've looked at from May to about June, from January to May, and said, what's the top 20 in 2020? And you'll see some things that have changed. The NC means no change, and then you'll see some things that have elevated greatly and some things that have diminished. So if we look through these, ownership structure still top because there's still a lot of issues with that and with the pandemic and with a lot of companies still in limbo as to what's going to happen because we don't know how long this is going to go on. We don't know the full set of impacts. Then there's a lot of possibility that you're going to see further in ownership structures. That can also include things like bankruptcies where you have hostile takeovers and things like that. So ownership structure, still top. Key employee stability, again, if you're going to get through this pandemic, you're going to need your key people, so that stays at number 2. Number 3 was the business partner fines. And all of a sudden, in 2020, we see it's disasters at the location. So this is disasters at the company's location. That's the buying company. It's the customer's location. Number 4, and I'm surprised this wasn't higher, pandemic disease outbreak. Again, this study was through May. So things in May, if you remember, a lot of companies and a lot of the cities and towns and states felt like they could start opening things back up. So maybe they thought this was moving to the back burner. But what we've seen since then is that the pandemic is even taking more center stage. And if you did that study today, I wouldn't be surprised to have this at number 2 or number 3. So this is a huge issue for all of us. We know that, we feel it, we live it every day. So it wasn't even on the radar screen last year, and of course, it's front and center this year. Disaster at location was number 5. Now it's business partner fines. So it's what your business partners are doing and how they're managing those issues. Earthquake, flash flood, and storms, extratropical storms, and now it's field issues. Again, back to what's going on with your supplier. Disasters at your partner site, which can be natural and unnatural disasters. That one is up a lot. The field issues is actually down. So what was a bigger issue last year was number 4 is now number 6. Field business partner fines has reduced a number 2 slots too, from number 3 to number 5. Disasters at partner sites, that's up. That was number 10, now it's up to 7, and that could go higher as well. The extratropical storm, because when this was done, we were coming into hurricane season and it was projected as a fairly significant probability of having several storms this year, that's probably why it stayed the same. It didn't go up or down. And if you did it today with Isaias running amok all over the Northeast, or about to run amok on the Northeast, then it might even be higher. Power outages fell to number 10, and then industrial disputes at partner sites is up considerably. That wasn't even on the list last year, and it's number 9 now. And that's because there's a lot of things happening, again, with suppliers, and companies are keenly aware that their suppliers are going to help them or hinder them during this pandemic and getting into and through recovery. So we've also seen some significant increases in the emphasis that business owners and business managers put on these. So from January to May 2020 versus 2019, disasters at partner site, this is up 2.5 times from what it was a year ago. Disasters at location at the company that you work for, that's up 2 times what it was last year. Cybersecurity is up 1.8 times. Again, that's probably related to a lot of people working from home, working outside of the range of normal IT security and computers and things like that. So that's up. People are concerned about that. This is the perception of risk from senior managers. Key employee instability, 1.5 times what it was last year. Staff dispute risks at the partner. So this is, does your partner be able to manage their workforce? And are they having disputes within their staff? 1.4 times. Industrial disputes at your partner, up 1.4 times. And then supplier financial stability, which has always been high, is now up 1.2 times, up 20% what it was a year ago. So always on the high end of the radar screen for people, supplier financial stability, it's now 20% higher than it was. So risk methods also looked at some early warning signs, and they have some early warning signs, and they put a percentage on there with what people are seeing. So pandemic outbreaks up 3,000+%, of course. If you would have told people a year ago we'd be in the middle of a pandemic at this point, I know I would have taken that bet and said, no way, it's not going to happen. And I would have risked a lot because I was confident that we in this country would not be hit this severely, but here we are. Disaster at partner sites up 151%. So companies are seeing that. Information and IP security, again, not something any company has taken lightly in years, 77% increase. Local events, 69%, especially with a lot of the activities recently, with people gathering when they're not supposed to, with people protesting, with a lot of different things going on across the country. Labor practices and human rights, again, up 69%. And key employee stability, up 46%. Staff disputes, these are internal staff disputes, up 43%. Supplier financial stability, up 22%. Quality, 19%, and power outages, 2%. There have been some decreases, though, which I think is interesting. So location disputes, those are disputes within your company, down 69%. The political situation of the country, down 50%, even with all of the turmoil and all of the stuff on the news all day, every day. Natural hazards, down 26%. Again, this could change if we have the hurricanes that we start to see now, if these increase or if this is, as some portend, that it's going to be a bad season for hurricanes. And then environmental, down 9%. I think that's just a matter of prioritization, that we don't have enough energy and we don't have enough hands and fingers to juggle all of those things. So the final chart I'm going to share with you is comparing 2020 to 2019 in terms of top threats to organizations. So the 2019 is in gray, and in the red is the 2020. So both years, it's roughly a third of all the warnings are focused on indicators relating to supplier financial stability. In 2019, it was 32%. In the first 5 months of this year, it was 30%. And again, that encompasses a lot of things, but this is an indicator that if you understand that your supplier has financial instability, then that's going to set off all kinds of warning bells, and it can result in a lot of other risks as well. Employee stability stayed pretty much the same, 16% last year, 17% this year. Local events up slightly higher this year, and again, I wouldn't be surprised if it was not more than that, but then we have a big 8% pandemic outbreak here that wasn't even on the radar screen. So that affected some of the other results. Regulatory and legal is down a little bit. Natural hazards are down a little bit. And then disaster at the supplier site, still on the radar screen, but a little lower than last year. A little higher than last year, but still only 6%. So there's a lot of things going on that we need to all be aware of. So if you look at all these graphs, here's what it said to me, that the top issues from 2019 are still relevant. So we say everything has changed, but when you really look at it, not everything has changed. We have, yes, a different spin on things, but what was important last year, the top 10 items, 8 of those are still in the top 10. And some of those are still in the same place. The top 1, 2 issues were still the same between 2019 and 2020 through May of this year. This pandemic was a huge surprise, and we don't know the full impact of this because we're still smack in the middle of it. But we're going to see what happens over time and how this plays out. What this pandemic has done, I think, is to heighten awareness of risk in general, and in some types of risk, I think companies and individuals have a heightened awareness of that. On the other hand, I think we're so focused on the pandemic that we may have taken our eyes off some of the other issues and some of the other risk areas that are still very much there and still could very much affect all of us at any time. So these natural disasters are still a threat. We have Isaias that's going on right now. There's a lot of different things happening. So that could be an issue all through the summer and into that. And again, we have tornadoes and many other things too, natural disasters. And again, fires here in the California area go into about November. So there's a lot of different natural disasters still knocking at the door or potential. Regulatory issues, legal requirements, all of that has to be done and it has to be maintained. So even though we've got a lot of focus on the pandemic, we can't take our eye off that ball either because we have to keep those things going. We have to keep those things in play and up to speed. Cybersecurity is not in the top 10, but it doesn't mean that it's not a big concern. There's still a lot of issues and there are still a lot of potential things that can happen, especially again, with people working from home, with internets being overloaded, with some people not as familiar with certain programs as they might be, could be, will be by the time we get through this. Supplier financial stability is a key indicator. Those are things that are important. We want to keep an eye on those. These impacts vary greatly across the geography, across our demographics. So if you look at the COVID numbers across the globe, you'll see some that are way ahead of us. You'll see some that are behind us. You'll see some that are about the same place that the United States are. And if you look at the United States, of course, you've got all kinds of different scenarios. You've got New York, who was really hit hard early and has seemed to contain that, and their numbers are dropping. They're reopening in phases. Things are working pretty well there. And then you see other states, including California, who did well for a while and now has been on a very strong uptick. And that, of course, is joined by Arizona, Florida, Texas, just by the numbers, the increases of cases, the increases of deaths, the filling up of the hospitals, especially the ICU units, a lot of different things going on there. So the demographics are different. And of course, you look at the different age groups, you look at the different income levels, you look at the racial distribution. The COVID thing is just all over the board. And there are some definite patterns that are coming up there. So they're doing that analysis of those demographics as these things occur. What you'll still see is that companies need talent. people need the skills, and companies need the people with those skills. So that is still important for companies to attract, develop, and retain what they need to keep their companies moving. There are going to be some aftershocks. We are, in some cases, some areas are still in the first wave of the virus. You'll see some disputes from different perspectives about this, but most everyone says that there is a second wave. If we are in the second wave, then we are, and if not, then most people say look for that towards the end of the year, in the fall and towards the end of the year. So we don't know, but that's what we think is going to happen. Economic decline, we just got numbers that the second quarter was fell off a cliff. So there's a lot of volatility there. You'll see different indicators like the stock market still not doing too badly, but you'll see unemployment up and just all kinds of different things about the economic health of the country and the world. There's a lot of volatility there. And it's going to be volatile until we can get a handle on this virus, because the virus and the health and the ability of people to go to work and to stay at work and to do their work is hinging on being healthy. And if you're not healthy, you're not able to do those things. And if you are healthy, you want to stay healthy. So there are some things that need to be in place so that workplaces can stay safe and keep people in that way. We're seeing a lot of changes in the demand of products and in the availability of products. That's affected retail stores, huge impacts in those areas. You're seeing a lot of companies file for bankruptcy. You're seeing a lot of mall stores closing that were maybe suspended before, and now they're just closing. You're seeing large department chains closing numbers of stores. All kinds of different things in retail. And then same thing with the availability of materials. I talked about the Clorox products. Clorox wipes especially are in short supply and are going to remain so, in part because the material that they make those with is the same kind of material base that you use in PPE, in gowns and in masks and things like that. So that material is in short supply, and it's going to stay in short supply until the demand ebbs a little bit and until they can get their production increased, even though companies like Clorox, Procter & Gamble, other companies that make those types of products have done huge things in the last 3-4 months to try to increase their production. Healthcare is been, many areas have, and many doctors, many practices have done things like to reduce the amount of elective procedures. Doctors have closed. They don't want to see anybody unless it's an emergency. They've been more willing to extend your prescription. So if you were supposed to get your blood checked every 6 months, they may give you an extra 3 months on that without getting your blood checked, because it may be more dangerous to get your blood checked than to just keep you on the same dose of medicine for another couple of months. So healthcare, the PPE is a big impact on that. And again, that takes material away from other products in some cases, and some companies have pivoted to making healthcare products that didn't do that before. So there's a lot of things going on there. Services, anything from restaurants and waiters, concerts, to business services that have been suspended, put on hold, slowed down, all these kinds of things. So services, both business and personal, things like salons, things like cleaning services, coffee services, food trucks, a lot of things have been impacted by this, and you're going to see those changes still continue to percolate. So you're going to see aftershocks of this. Even as we get a handle on the virus, you're going to see these other things that are still volatile and still a little bit shaky. The elections are causing that. The closer we get to that, the more turmoil, the more angst, the more it seems the more divisive our country gets. So we hope that after the elections we can unify around something, but those elections are not just the president. There's many local elections as well. And the elections themselves and the mail-in ballots and all of that is causing, you're going to see aftershocks from that. From the supply chains that involve China and Asian suppliers, there's trade agreements there. You're going to see that reverberate a little bit. Tariffs and taxes that were volatile before the pandemic, after the pandemic, probably even more so. As we reopen in phases, the conditions that we reopen under, what that does to us um, as a workforce, what that does to us as citizens, what that does to us as travelers, all of those things come into play. And we're going to see that reverberate for a while. There's going to be a lot of impacts to workforce, things from working from home. Companies are trying to figure out how to do that, how to continue that, how to moderate that so that you get some people at work, some people at home, or some days a week. The same thing they're doing with schools. They're trying to figure out how to open the schools, get the kids back into the learning mode without putting the children and or the staff and the teachers at risk. And then what conditions we return to work in are changing all the time. There's a lot of conditions, there's a lot of recommendations, and there's a lot of things that we're taking into account as we move that way. So some of the key takeaways, things that I want you to think about today are that supply chains are critical to business success. We know that as supply chain professionals, but the world is learning that this is very important. The organizational visibility into the entire supply chain is now more critical than ever. There are many senior executives in companies who really didn't pay that much attention to the supply chain. They may have paid attention to the availability of inventory or the type of inventory, but they weren't really looking at what are all the steps and what does it take to get that inventory. Now, many of these senior execs want to understand how the supply chain is set up, where is the weak link, and how are we going to shore that up? And then how are we going to make sure that we keep this supply chain intact so that we can keep making and producing the goods and services that our customers need and to adapt to what customers need going forward. So if you've been reactive and your company is reactive, you're going to be a little too little and a little too late. So we're going to have to figure out how to be more proactive and how to get ahead of these things. Risk-based decision-making is no longer an option. This is something that companies have toyed with for a while. Oh yeah, we'd like to do that, but it's going to take a while and we have to train everybody. And so not every really decision has to have that. No longer. Companies are going to move toward risk-based decision-making, and they're going to make sure it's implemented everywhere, and it's not going to be an option for any decision that's made within the organization. To be able to identify and assess risk is going to be something that many people are going to get trained and retrained on. We're learning on the job right now, understanding what's going on, but this is a continuous process. Some companies did a risk assessment maybe once a year and said, okay, we did that, we're good. No, this is a continuous process, and you have to stay with your fingers on that pulse to make sure that everything is working right throughout the supply chain. We need contingency mitigation plans more than ever, and more detailed and broader than we ever thought we would have to put together. We're finding that supplier relationships are essential to continuing business, to business continuity, and to going forward. So which suppliers have you been able to rely on? Which ones are helping you? Which ones are not helping you? And how are you going to move forward? But you need the staff to have the skills to assess, identify these problems and solutions. So to manage the risk, to manage the relationships, to manage the suppliers and the performance and make sure that you're getting what you need out of those suppliers, your staff has to be trained and have the skills to do all of those things. Not everyone has a staff that is able to do those things throughout their organization, their supply chain, their procurement organization. We need to be flexible, agile, and be able to respond quickly to any kind of impacts, whether they're full-on crises or whether they're just disruptions. There are a lot of indicators available, so keep your eyes open. Look at the indicators with these risk categories, because these will tell you there's early warning signals going on all the time. We have to pay attention and we have to react and be proactive in how we do that. So today I'm going to leave you with a statement from Adam Grant that is, he's the Saul P. Steinberg Professor of Management and Psychology at the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School, one of the best management schools in the country and probably in the world. So he says, this is a time when managers need to be flexible and compassionate, and to give people the freedom to make choices about when they work, how they work, where they work, and with whom they work. So there's a lot of meat in that sentence. To be flexible and compassionate, we don't often in recent history have talked a lot about managers being compassionate. Empathetic maybe and understanding, but also tough and knowing the rules. We're trying now to understand how we can encourage that compassion, how we can give people freedom to make choices. Some people love working from home. Some people would very much not like to work from home. So there's a lot of range in our choices. How does that work today, and how is it going to work in the future? Many people that I talk to are looking at evaluating what they're doing, who they're working for, how they're working, how their life has been before COVID, and what it is now, and what they want that to look like post-COVID. So there is, in all challenges, there is opportunity. So there is a great opportunity for us as individuals, for us as supply chain professionals, and for our businesses to morph from this, to learn and to come out better. So that's my strive to thrive for the week. In August, the rest of the month, we're going to do metrics for lean supply chains next week. We're going to talk about the difference between certifications and degrees in skill sets for supply chain professionals. And at the end of the month, we're going to talk about building and maintaining supplier trust, especially when we have a lot of uncertainty and this VUCA environment. So if you're not a subscriber, subscribe now to this. You can go to purple-link.net on the events page, and you can sign up for August, and you can sign up for a quarter's worth of weekly webinars. So if you want more information, please contact me. You can say call with Jane. I think the HTTP is the best way to get that, because I've had some people tell me that the callwithjane.com doesn't work. Other people say no problem. So I think it has to do with your browser and whatever. But I have some 30-minute calls set up to talk about how Purple Link can help your business, because there's a better way to reduce cost and risk. We have webinars set up right now for CPSM exam number 1 and exam number 3. They start the first week of September, and they go through about Thanksgiving. So you have all of that time to study, and then you can actually take your exam in December. If there's 3 tests required to get your certification, but if you start now, by July of next year, you can have your full certification and have another skill set and another ticket punch there. So if there are no questions from anyone, then I am going to go ahead and call it a day. So thank you very much today for recording. Thank you very much for attending. I wish you all a good week, and I hope to see you all next week.